journalists Mark Jacob and Jennifer Schulze and former U.S. Attorney Jim Santelle. How are y'all?
Good.
Here we are, another week down. It's funny how the first half of this month just seemed to fly by, and then the second half of the month, for some reason, just seemed to drag. I can't quite put my finger on it. But let me start my questioning to former U.S. Attorney Jim Santelle about what President Trump tried to do back on Monday, Tuesday, early Wednesday. This whole notion of unilaterally being able to put a pause on a wide swath of federal spending, things that weren't going directly to individuals like Social Security checks, but anything that was like a grant or a loan or went through another group, which, as we all came to appreciate, is a lot that gets done. But let's start with the legal aspect of it first. He pulled back after 24 hours, Jim. Is it because you think he got bad advice that nobody happened to mention to him? The law that was passed in the wake of Richard Nixon, that you can't do the thing that you're going to do, that you're talking about doing?
Right. The anti-impoundment statute. Oh, by the way, this thing called the Constitution of the United States of America, which also provides checks and balances. And this is why this is so problematic. This is why federal judges out there are saying the executive branch, the president, cannot do these things, both on birthright citizenship, now also on these kinds of unilateral decisions that change legislation. Goes back to the Constitution. Who initiates budgets? Who initiates financial things? It's in the House of Representatives, goes to the Senate, and the United States Congress puts together a budget. They appropriate, they allocate funds, different meanings for those two things. The president goes on, probably most often signs those budgets, and it becomes the law of the land. And that's the point, just like any other legislation would. I'd also invoke the language of the Constitution. Again, Article 2, Section 3, that talks about how our president is obliged. He took an oath of office to take care that the laws of our nation be faithfully executed. That's James Madison stuff. And when you unilaterally decide that you're going to take up a pen and decide that the laws of the United States are no longer to be followed, and I've decided that, in fact, it should be something else, you're in violation of the Constitution. It's just that simple. Add one more footnote, which is some of these judges are also asking, Pat, precisely the question that you've asked, which is anybody in the West Wing, is anybody in the White House standing around the president saying, Mr. President, you can't do this. Let's take a look at the Constitution. Do we have any decent, thoughtful lawyers beyond the first year of law school who know about this? Apparently the answer is not so much.
No. We've all got the answer for you there, Mark. Mark, tell us from your standpoint, the coverage of it. Now, obviously, the first few hours of it were confusing because we're like, wait, he's doing what? Can he do that? How would you characterize what followed in terms of responsibly outlining either both the legality of the proposed move, but also the impact on people, that this wasn't just some 30,000 foot constitutional, conversation. This was about real impact.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, everyone started panicking with good reason. I mean, some of these, Meals on Wheels might have to stop. I mean, getting old people fed food might be a problem. And the Medicaid portal was down, and the new press secretary, Caroline Leavitt, held her first press briefing, and she could not even tell people whether Medicaid was affected. I mean, it was just stunning how reckless this whole thing was rolled out. And I know the media asked the questions, they didn't get, too many answers, but the really important takeaway for me is that there was blowback. There were people screaming. There were people upset. There was a lawsuit filed, and there was, the judges acted. And when you have a reckless executive branch that is not going to respect anybody's rights or the balance of power in American democracy, then blowback is really important, and people need to scream loudly.
Am I being, Jennifer, a little too rose-colored glasses on this, or was this particular exercise actually a good bit of civic engagement where people suddenly understood, oh, when we talk about federal spending, it's not just it goes to the Pentagon or it goes to this, it goes to all of these things right in my community that impact me and my neighbors or my Is that wishful thinking on my part that we kind of got a good kind of civics education out of the chaos?
No, I agree with you. And I also think that Trump in general has been a wake-up call for how much we do not know about how our government works and what our government does, and things that we take for granted. I mean, from top to bottom, he's ripping apart systems that have been in place that I'm quite confident that most people in America have never really given a thought to. And so, in that regard, yes, it's good news that that you might actually have to think about where's the pipeline. Where's that money for Meals on Wheels coming from? Where's that money for cancer research coming from? How does that work? If it forces at least some of us to start thinking about that and the implications of that, I think that is a good thing. Big picture, it's horrifying.
But it gets to a point that you were making last week, is that unlike Trump's first term, and again, here's the caveat, there's still a lot of progress to be made, but that some news outlets seem to be doing a better job of looking for accountability, looking for the signal, not just the noise.
I agree. And I think we've seen that again this week. Part of the problem is the fire hose of activity from Trump. And frankly, we don't have enough news media to cover it. And so things are coming out in blibs and blobs. Like there's an independent journalist, I think her name is Maria Cabas. I'm not quite sure I'm getting her name right. Mm-hmm. She broke the story all on her own about the first OPM memo coming out about the freeze. Okay. Not the Washington Post, not the New York Times. She did.
Mm-hmm. And that's, we'll talk a bit more about, finding those good media sources when we continue with our panel coming up next. This is Up North News Radio, live from Chippewa Falls on the Civic Media Radio Network. Back in a bit.
Stop.
Justin Timberlake has a birthday today, turns 44 years old. Mary, thank you for the comment on YouTube. I am sharing your broadcast with friends and family that need to hear your show. Thank you for being here in this time of great need. Happy Friday. Thank you for that, Mary. With perhaps a conflicting view is a text from Len in Madison that says, retired, listening at home on the old radio, wish it had remote control for volume on off and changing station. I'm hoping he just meant that about wanting to adjust the volume and not about changing the station. But Len, if you're there, we appreciate you listening anyway. Continuing on with our Friday panel here, former U.S. Attorney Jim Santelle, journalist Mark Jacob, and Jennifer Schulze. And Mark, I'm going to start with you because of the news that CBS and through it Paramount is looking to settle a lawsuit. Trump sued them over a 60 Minutes piece. And much like ABC settled a suit brought by Trump with that they probably really didn't have to settle, and the same goes for Meta, Facebook. Now CBS is doing it. Is this legalized bribery out of Trump? I sue you and then you give me money?
I view it more as a protection racket.
You go. Yes.
Real, nice network you got there. It'd be a shame if something bad happened to it. And so then he sues, and then they settle. And then they get what they want. In the case of CBS, you've got Paramount, which is the parent company that owns CBS. They're trying to do a merger with something called Skydance Media, and it requires federal approval. The Trump people have made it clear that they want to hold that up because they're mad at CBS, and so the Trump people sue CBS over how they edited a Kamala Harris interview on 60 Minutes. Ridiculous. I mean, everyone who deals with that kind of law says that this is a stupid suit, that there's no way that Trump would win. But Redstone, head of Paramount, she may be settling just to get her merger done. So you end up having this. It's a protection racket, and it is. If she does this, it will be, completely just putting a shiv in the ribs of 60 Minutes, of one of the most vaunted shows in journalism history. She will be killing its credibility and disabling it. And
it's got journalists outraged there and everywhere. Jennifer, just really quickly behind the scenes on this, just so we tell people the mechanics of it. What CBS did was they asked a question of Kamala Harris, and she gave kind of a longer answer. The promo shows the question and part of the answer, but the actual piece shows the question and a different part of the answer, but it's all the same answer to the same question. Trump claims it's deceptive. It's been standard practice as far as I know, but maybe you have reason to find fault with it?
No, not at all. That's totally normal broadcasting practice. A promo is a certain length, and you pick something that fits within that time frame. Your piece, the that airs within the 60 Minutes show, is a different length, and you pick a soundbite that fits with that and goes with whatever the reporter is writing. The idea that he's alleging election interference because of editing of a couple of words is so ludicrous on its face. I can't believe it hasn't been thrown out of court, let alone that CBS is willing to pay him, or at least appears to be willing to pay him, a $25 million bribe. I don't even know what you do with that if you're a journalist at 60 Minutes or CBS. I think, I don't know how you keep working there. But
No.
then I don't know if you don't work there, what you do.
But we said that about the LA Times, too,
Right,
after that publisher, rolled over as well. Jim Santelle, do you have a different point of view that there's something in any of these cases that would lead you to recommend settling such a suit?
There's absolutely nothing. And my colleagues here on our panel got it just right. There's a case, we all know it well. It's called New York Times versus Sullivan. It's an extraordinarily high standard for good reasons. Supreme Court has said that you basically have to just show intent and malice in doing something. Got to get the facts wrong. There's got to be some damage to reputation. All these kinds of things come in play. The editing of an interview comes nowhere near that. And I'm stunned not only that Paramount and CBS are doing this, but that the larger journalism community out there, as I guess we're talking this morning, is not rising up and saying, what a terrible precedent to set. If this is the kind of case legally that the lawyers either are recommending or maybe not recommending to be settled, what is next? What is next? And again, under established law, this should go nowhere. This, to Jennifer's good point, this should have gone off on what's called summary judgment or even a motion to dismiss on the pleadings that there is no case here. What is going on here? And I think the frustration that you're hearing this morning is very, very well articulated.
Yeah, hey, and Pat, this is what would have a chilling effect on other newsrooms too. Lawyers at every news organization would be telling their journalists, "No, you can't write that. We might get sued." And so it's not just CBS and Paramount that would be affected. It would affect everyone.
The funny thing is, well, not the funny thing, but the thing that shows the times that we live in is that these established newsrooms that have been run credibly for decades and have certain standards and practices and attorneys and everything, they're the ones getting hit so hard right now for trying to hold Donald Trump accountable. Meanwhile, Jennifer, there are these smaller outlets that, again, you can play favorites with. We heard in the White House press conference, they're going to bring in some, content creators and influencers, clearly the ones that they like. And Jennifer, you were writing about how there's a little media channel owned by Dr. Phil, which somehow is like getting the exclusive on these ICE immigration raids in Chicago. And it's like, again, what kind of media world are we living in now? I don't know.
Well, everybody's a journalist. If you have a camera, I suppose you can be a truth teller. And so there's been such a blurring of the lines that I think that's been just a huge problem. Not that I think that everybody doesn't have a voice and people, if they, want to get into this business, they should. But Dr. Phil is not a journalist. He does not do news. He does propaganda. Somewhere along the lines, he turned hard right, and he's been all in for Trump and MAGA for a while now. And he was here in Chicago, the only media given access to ICE. He was broadcasting from ICE command headquarters in a very scary voice, telling us how serious and scary these raids were going to be. And it was just so ludicrous, so embarrassing. And it was all a Trump manufactured program designed to share Trump propaganda. And And I don't know how many people watched it. I don't know what influence it had, but it's part of a really distressing trend in the country where, Dr. Phil, I'm sure, has a decidedly different news audience than you, Pat, or mainstream media. And he's the voice there telling a story that, frankly, is not true. I can find no evidence that any of the people that he features in his piece have actually been arrested. Just to put that point on it.
That's the fragmentation again that I talk about, Mark. That a Joe Rogan, previously known for hosting Fear Factor and MMA fights and things like that, has the most popular podcast. Well, therefore, he gets access to people, and there's nothing wrong with access, but again, there's a difference between how journalists ask questions and some guy who suddenly got a popular talk show asks questions.
Right, and it's a backroom deal. I mean, it's a deal. If you're nice to me, you'll get time with me, and it'll be good for both of us. And that's not journalism. There's something inherent in journalism that's kind of adversarial about public figures, where you're asking them hard questions they may not want to answer. You're bringing facts that they would maybe don't want the public to know. But none of that happens in this kind of, dealing, this kind of, you're my favorite person, so I'm going to give you the access. Nobody else gets it, and you'll lie for me. And that's what's going on here. And that, Pat, it just goes to show us that right-wing propaganda is brilliant. I mean, they do a really good job of lying to the public. I mean, they're very good at it. And people who want to fight that need to get better.
Folks who have heard Mark and I talk previously on Fridays know that the New York Times often comes in as a bit of a punching bag, but it's one of their own making. And you point out one that definitely got my attention yesterday. After Trump's ugly news conference blaming DEI baselessly for a crash, the original New York Times headline reads, "What caused the crash into the Potomac? For Trump, it was diversity."
Right.
They fixed that later, I assume.
Well, yes. And that's a headline on the homepage. The story itself actually said that he was, that he had no evidence and that he was, making up stuff to try to act like, women and people of color couldn't, work in the aviation industry. I mean, which is just so insulting, Pat. I mean, it's like, think about, back, 20, 30, 40 years ago, we had a lot of air crashes back when hiring policies favored white men. So, so if you want to do like the DEI thing, you figure that into the equation. This is the first fatal crash in U.S. commercial aviation in about 15 or 16 years. So these DEI policies, I don't even like to call them that. Diversity hiring or fair hiring is what I'd rather call them. Mm-hmm. If they were so disastrous, how come this is the first fatal commercial air crash in 15 or 16 years?
Right.
I also want to point out that 94% of the pilots in America are white men. So just so we, that's a reality check.
Well, you're saying they're under attack if it's down to 94% now, right? Is certainly the way MAGA world would look at this. Jim, it raises this question about networks and, these multi-million-dollar settlements for suits. But I just mentioned like Joe Rogan and anybody else who can have a podcast. I've always kind of wondered about how more of these podcast hosts or companies, how they're not facing, their own slander and libel lawsuits, because some people on podcasts say some pretty outrageous things. And I sometimes wonder, Jim, if you were like a legal advisor to some of these folks starting shows or podcasts or whatnot, if you feel like they know enough about avoiding the landmines that could get you in legal hot water.
They plainly do not, when they are in these podcasts and in other forums saying things that are not only factually untrue, but they know that they're untrue, and they're advanced for exactly that purpose. As we're discussing this, all of us are thinking, of course, about another lawsuit. Remember the Dominion voting machines case involving Fox News? There was a situation where, again, millions of dollars, huge settlement, huge judgment there. Why? Because Fox News said something in its forums affirmatively, demonstrably untrue with the intent, obviously, to harm. And they're very unusual under New York Times versus Sullivan. There is the situation where, in fact, there is a basis for recovery by a private entity or a corporation out there. Not here. And that's the point. Beyond that, we think about the other word I'd throw out there is deterrence, right? That in part, by CBS and others settling these cases, you're not deterring anybody. You're not deterring Donald Trump from continuing to make these completely unfounded allegations, to bring these lawsuits. And a big part of the public domain in and outside of court is to stop people from doing the bad things. That regrettably now also has to include the President of the United States of America.
Who'd have thought? I've got under a minute left, so Mark and Jennifer, just really quick answers out of you. I have to admit that I was completely wrong. I said in all seriousness that I fully, after Matt Gaetz, stepped down from consideration, I said, there's no way Pete Hegseth gets confirmed as defense secretary. I was wrong. You needed 4 Republicans to show some spine. 3 of them did. So my question to you quickly is RFK Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard. Do they skate by and get confirmed as well, Mark?
I think RFK does not, and I think Gabbard does.
Jennifer?
I agree with Mark.
And that's where we are with this cabinet.
Yeah,
you
isn't that
take
sad?
take
Isn't
out
that
the
sad?
extremes, and the ones who should be the extremes in normal times, they just skate right through. But all right. Now, stay tuned, because next week we get this panel's bold predictions on Super Bowl. No, we don't, because I'll be gone next week. But anyway, Jennifer Schulze, Mark Jacob, Jim Santelle, thank you all so much. Appreciate it. Have a great weekend.